He sat alone on a weathered park bench, unshaven, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, his lunch in a crumpled brown paper bag beside him. He wasn't waiting for anyone. Or so he thought. That's when a stranger walked up and asked, "Mind if I sit here?" He barely looked up. Just nodded. What happened next would change his life forever. This isn't just a feel-good story. It's a story about grief, fate, and unexpected redemption. About a single dad who thought he had lost everything, until a woman he'd never met offered him something unimaginable: hope, written in ink on a piece of paper that looked suspiciously like a contract. Before we dive into what was in that paper and who she really was, I've got to ask you something. Imagine you're sitting alone, vulnerable, and someone you don't know shares your meal, and then slides a contract across the table. Would you sign it? Would you trust her? Or would you walk away forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love seeing your perspective. And if you're the kind of person who still believes in second chances, hit that like button. If real, powerful human stories move you, go ahead and subscribe. These stories are real, raw, emotional, and sometimes almost unbelievable. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next one. And please, share this video with someone who might need a reminder that kindness still exists. That humanity isn't gone. That moments matter. Alright, let's rewind. Who was this man before life broke him? Why was he really in that park that day? What led to this moment, this meal, this stranger? And who was the woman who sat beside him with a secret so big, it would turn everything around? Let's find out together. Before that fateful day in the park, Mark was just a name on a forgotten spreadsheet at a warehouse job he never loved. He was 39, a single father of a little girl named Ellie, and still grieving the sudden loss of his wife, Julia, who had passed away 2 years earlier in a car accident. Julia was the light of his life, the glue in their family, and without her, every day felt like he was dragging his feet through mud. He'd wake up at 5 a.m., pack Ellie's school lunch with shaky hands, and walk her to the bus stop in silence. She had stopped asking questions about her mom. Mark noticed that. She just adapted, the way kids do when they're forced to grow up too soon. And it shattered him. Mornings were quiet. Evenings were worse. He'd sit at the edge of Ellie's bed at night, telling her the same bedtime story Julia used to read, trying to replicate the softness in her voice, but always failing. After she fell asleep, he'd stay up staring at the ceiling, wondering how he was supposed to do this alone. Mark's lunch that day in the park? It wasn't special. Just a turkey sandwich, some chips, and an apple. But to him, it was a sacred ritual. The only time in the day he could sit in peace. That bench had become his sanctuary, his escape from the crushing weight of bills, loneliness, and a life that felt like it had flatlined into numb routine. He didn't talk much anymore. His co-workers thought he was rude. Friends stopped inviting him out. Even Ellie's teachers noticed he rarely smiled. But no one ever said anything. People tend to avoid broken things, even if they used to love them. That kind of silence becomes its own kind of grief. What made it harder was that Mark wasn't bitter. He wasn't angry at the world. He was just tired. Tired of pretending he was okay. Tired of explaining grief to people who had never felt it. He wanted someone to see him, not as a widower, not as a struggling father, but as a man who was trying, every single day, not to drown. He used to play the guitar. Used to write letters to Julia, even after she died, just to feel close to her. But the letters stopped 6 months ago. The music too. There's only so much silence one person can hold before it eats them alive. He even tried therapy once. Walked into a community center, sat in the lobby, filled out the form, and then left before his name was called. He told himself he was fine. But deep down, he knew he wasn't. He was sinking. Drowning in a sea of memories. And then came that woman. The stranger. The one who looked him in the eyes without pity. She didn't ask him how he was doing. She just asked if she could sit. That tiny question was the beginning of everything. It started like every other lunch break. Mark took his usual seat on the same park bench, under the same fading tree, with the same modest lunch. He unwrapped his sandwich, took a bite, and watched squirrels dart through fallen leaves. It was routine, uneventful. Until it wasn't. She walked toward him with quiet confidence. Mid-30s, clean blazer, clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other. Not the type you'd expect in a park on a weekday afternoon. She smiled, not a polite one, but a soft, curious kind that made Mark feel like she already knew him. She didn't introduce herself. Just gestured to the empty spot beside him and asked, "Mind if I sit?" He nodded, still chewing, slightly wary. Most people walked by without a second glance. Strangers didn't sit next to him. Not since Julia. They sat in silence for a moment. Then she surprised him. "Your sandwich smells better than my lunch," she said, laughing lightly. Mark chuckled, a dry, hesitant sound he hadn't made in weeks. "It's turkey," he said. "Nothing special." She held up her coffee. "Mine's just caffeine and regret." That made him laugh for real. The sound felt strange coming from his own chest. But good. Like something had cracked open just slightly. Minutes passed. They chatted about nothing, weather, lunch, how pigeons always seem like they're late to something. Slowly, Mark relaxed. For the first time in a long while, he felt human. Then she said something strange. "You look like someone who's carrying a lot but doesn't talk about it." He froze. That wasn't small talk. That was X-ray vision. He tried to deflect, but she didn't press. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I want to show you something," she said, sliding it gently onto the bench between them. Mark looked at it, then at her. "What is it?" "A chance," she replied. "A different kind of contract." He raised an eyebrow. "You're not selling something, are you?" "Nope. I'm offering something. You just have to be willing to read it." He stared at the paper, heart thudding. Every instinct told him to walk away. But curiosity kept him seated. Something about her presence felt calm. Safe. "Why me?" he asked, finally. "Because you showed up," she said simply. "Most people don't." The words hit him like a wave. All the days he showed up despite the pain. All the mornings he got Ellie ready, all the nights he didn't collapse into grief. All the quiet strength he carried like a second skin, she saw it. "I'm not sure I'm ready for anything big," he said, hesitating. "You don't have to be," she replied. "You just have to be willing to look." Her voice was calm. Steady. Not sleazy. Not rehearsed. Just sincere. That, more than anything, disarmed him. He picked up the paper slowly, fingertips brushing against hers for a second. There was no shock, no magic moment, just warmth. Steady, human warmth. The document was typed, 2 pages long. At the top, personal transition opportunity, voluntary agreement. Below that, smaller lines of text. He didn't read it right away. Instead, he looked up at her again. "What's this really about?" She smiled. "It's about rewriting a chapter. If you're ready." He exhaled. For the first time in years, he wanted to be. Maybe he didn't know what the next page held. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth turning. That moment, the moment he decided to read, was when everything began to shift. Not because of what the paper said, but because someone finally believed he still had chapters worth writing. Mark unfolded the paper, hands trembling slightly. The words blurred for a moment, not from confusion, but from the weight of the moment. It wasn't a legal document, not in the traditional sense. It looked more like a proposal. There were terms, yes. But not for a business deal. For something else, something personal, almost intimate. Meanwhile, she waited silently. Calm. Patient. Like someone who knew the value of silence and timing. She didn't rush him. Didn't push. Her name was written at the bottom of the page, Avery Hart. Underneath that, a title, Program Director, Life Forward Foundation. Mark looked up. A foundation? Avery nodded. We work with people at a crossroads. People who've experienced trauma, loss, or major life changes and are struggling to find their next step. We don't advertise. We don't recruit. We find people the world has stopped noticing. He blinked, overwhelmed. And you just show up. Only when someone's been nominated, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. Nominated? She smiled. You have someone who sees you, Mark. Someone who thinks you deserve more than what life's handed you. Mark's throat tightened. Who? I can't tell you. Part of the agreement. But I can tell you they believe in you. Enough to recommend you for a 6-month program, financial support, therapy, mentorship, and help re-entering the world on your own terms. He stared at her. This is real? Very real, she said. But only if you're ready. The more he read, the more surreal it felt. The contract didn't ask him to give anything. No fees. No catch. Just commitment. A willingness to participate. To try. He paused, scanning Avery's calm demeanor. Why do you do this? He asked. She smiled gently. Because I needed it once. And no one showed up for me. She told him a story about her younger brother, Evan. A talented artist who battled depression quietly for years. One day, he stopped returning calls. Avery found him too late. The system had failed him. So had everyone else. Including her. I promised I'd never let someone else fall through the cracks, she said. So I left my career and built something that catches people before they disappear. Mark listened, jaw tight. Her pain was real. Not rehearsed. There were tears in her voice, though her eyes stayed strong. That's why we keep it personal, she continued. No billboards. No campaigns. Just people helping people. Quietly. When it matters most. He looked back at the contract. And you think I'm one of those people? I know you are. For a moment, Mark didn't say anything. He thought about all the days he felt invisible. All the mornings he got out of bed because Ellie needed him, not because he had any strength left. And now this, someone handing him a second chance, not out of pity, but because they understood. He looked at Avery again. You're not what I expected. She chuckled. No one ever expects a stranger with a clipboard and a contract to be the beginning of something good. The stranger was no longer a stranger. She had a name. A story. A reason. And slowly, a bridge began to form between two broken people, one reaching out, the other finally ready to reach back. He didn't sign right away. But he didn't walk away either. Sometimes, healing begins with a simple act, being seen. And for the first time in years, Mark finally felt visible. Not as a project. Not as a case. But as a person worth saving. Worth investing in. Worth believing in again. Mark sat on the bench, contract in hand, while Avery watched the leaves fall without saying a word. The silence wasn't awkward, it was respectful. She gave him space. He turned the first page again. At the top, Life Forward Voluntary Life Restoration Agreement. The language was surprisingly human. It wasn't written like legalese. It was like someone had taken the time to write to a real person. It outlined a 6-month process focused on rebuilding identity, purpose, and connection. The contract promised structured therapy, career coaching, childcare support for Ellie, financial relief for basic needs, and mentorship from people who had been through similar paths. The catch? Full commitment. Emotional honesty. And the willingness to try. It sounded like everything Mark had ever needed, and everything he was terrified of. Avery finally spoke. Most people think the scary part is signing. It's not. It's showing up after. Mark nodded slowly. What if I fail? You will, she said simply. Everyone does. But failing in motion is still progress. Standing still. That's what breaks people. The phrase stuck with him. Failing in motion. He kept reading. The second page had details on the weekly rhythm. One-on-one sessions with a trauma counselor. Group therapy with others who had experienced loss. Career readiness workshops, resume building, interview coaching, and even job placements based on his interests. There was a line item that stood out: reclaiming joy, individualized passion support. What's this part? Mark asked, pointing. Avery leaned in. That's where we help you reconnect with things that used to make you feel alive. Music. Writing. Cooking. Painting. Whatever used to light you up before the world dimmed it. Mark's chest tightened. He hadn't touched his guitar in over a year. You really think that matters? He asked. I think it's everything, Avery replied. Grief strips identity. This is how you get pieces of yourself back. He kept flipping. There was a testimonial page, anonymous reflections from past participants. One person wrote, I walked in a ghost. I walked out whole. Another said, they didn't save me. They reminded me how to save myself. It sounded impossible. But it also sounded like hope. The final page had a single line: by signing, you agree to let us walk with you. Not ahead of you. Not behind you. But beside you. Mark stared at the line for a long time. He hadn't walked beside anyone in a long time. Not since Julia. What if I'm not ready? He asked quietly. Avery didn't pressure him. She just said, then don't sign today. But promise yourself to think about it like your life depends on it. Because in some ways, it does. Mark looked down at the contract again. He imagined Ellie's face. Her quiet resilience. Her growing silence. She deserved more than a father barely holding it together. She deserved a man who was healing. Who was trying. He didn't sign. Not yet. But he folded the contract carefully and tucked it into his jacket like it was something precious. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course, Avery said, standing. But just know, the moment you decide to try, we'll be ready. He watched her walk away, heels crunching softly on the gravel path. The paper in his jacket felt heavier than it should. Not a burden. A possibility. And for the first time in a long time, Mark allowed himself to believe, maybe he wasn't beyond repair. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something he didn't even know he needed. Mark didn't sign the contract that day. But he thought about it constantly. For 3 nights, he stared at it after Ellie fell asleep, reading the words over and over, as if looking for a sign in the margins. On the 4th morning, after making Ellie's breakfast and tying her shoes, he picked up the phone and dialed the number at the bottom. Avery answered. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. He didn't say much. Just, I'm ready to try. That was the beginning of everything. The first few weeks were the hardest. The program didn't magically fix him. There were days he wanted to quit. Days he showed up to therapy and sat in silence. Days he stared at the door, wondering if he should leave. But he stayed. His counselor, Ben, never pushed. He asked questions, but never demanded answers. Sometimes they sat quietly. Sometimes they talked about music. Eventually, Mark began to talk, not about Julia, not at first, but about the weather, traffic, Ellie's drawings. It didn't matter. Talking was a start. Group therapy was humbling. Mark walked in expecting strangers. He found family. There was a firefighter battling PTSD. A mother who'd lost a child. A teenager learning to love herself after years of self-harm. Different stories, same pain. They didn't try to fix each other. They just listened. They showed up. At home, Ellie noticed the difference. Her dad began making breakfast instead of pouring cereal. He helped with homework instead of silently watching TV. One night, he pulled his guitar from the back of the closet. Ellie sat on the floor, eyes wide. "You haven't played since Mommy." He strummed a chord, his fingers trembling. "I'm trying." Joy came slowly, like spring after a long winter. He began cooking again, trying new recipes. He wrote in a journal. He started jogging. He even made a new friend, David, another program member who had lost his wife to cancer. They met for coffee weekly. Talked about grief, guilt, growth. Career coaching helped Mark see he hadn't failed in life, he just never had the right tools. With the Foundation's help, he joined a nonprofit supporting bereaved families. Suddenly, his story wasn't a weight, it was a lifeline for others. One afternoon, Ellie handed him a drawing. It showed the two of them holding hands, with the words, "Me and my happy dad." He stared at it for a long time. Smiled. Then cried. Not from sadness, but from release. He wasn't perfect. He still had moments when the sadness crept in like fog. But now he had tools. He had people. He had purpose. 6 months later, Mark stood in front of a small crowd at a Life Forward graduation ceremony. He held a piece of paper, not a contract, but a letter he wrote to himself. "You're still broken," he read aloud. "But you're not buried. You showed up. You kept breathing. You gave your daughter more than survival, you gave her a father." The crowd was silent. Ellie sat in the front row, hands clasped, smiling. After the ceremony, Avery walked up. "You made it," she said. Mark shook his head. "I'm still making it." She nodded. "That's enough." Later that evening, back on that same park bench, Mark sat beside Ellie. They shared a sandwich and watched the sunset. "Why do we come here now?" she asked. "Because this is where I started to come back," he said. And with that, the man who once sat silently on a park bench found his voice, and used it to help others find theirs. The graduation ceremony marked the end of the program, but not the end of Mark's story. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Just his name, handwritten in a careful, looping script that looked vaguely familiar. No postage mark. Someone had delivered it by hand. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I was the one who nominated you." His heart stopped. The letter didn't include a name. Just a message, "I saw you in the park. Day after day. You didn't know I was watching. But I saw the way you sat there, quiet, defeated, eating the same sandwich. I saw you walk your daughter to school with that look in your eyes, the look of someone who hadn't given up, but had no one to notice they hadn't. I knew that look. I've worn it too. I work with Avery's Foundation. I've been where you were. And I saw myself in you. You didn't need saving. You just needed someone to believe you still had something left inside. Now you do the same for someone else." A friend, Mark stared at the words for a long time. Tears filled his eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming truth of being seen. Someone had noticed him in his silence. In his solitude. Someone had cared. He showed the letter to Avery. She didn't say much. Just smiled and nodded. "I told you," she said. "You were never invisible." Mark became a mentor in the program. Every Wednesday, he sat on a bench much like the one where it all began, waiting for someone new. A man. A woman. A teen. Someone who felt like the world had stopped noticing. He didn't try to fix them. He just sat beside them. Listened. Shared his story. Offered a quiet kind of hope. Sometimes, that's all people need. Then, one morning, as he walked Ellie to school, she tugged his hand. "Daddy," she said, "that lady from the park is back." He turned, startled. There she was, Avery, smiling, holding a clipboard. Beside her stood a woman. frazzled. Holding a baby. Tears in her eyes. Mark recognized the look instantly. He nodded to Avery. She nodded back. That afternoon, he sat with the woman on the bench. She didn't speak much. Just stared at the stroller, lost in her own silence. Mark didn't push. He just offered her half his sandwich and said, "It's turkey. Nothing special." She looked at him, then took a bite. He smiled. It had come full circle. The greatest twist in Mark's story wasn't the letter. It wasn't the stranger or the contract. It was realizing he wasn't alone. That somewhere, someone had once made the quiet decision to care, and that decision rippled outward, touching lives they'd never meet. He started keeping a journal, not for himself, but for Ellie. So one day, she'd understand where her father had gone emotionally, and how he found his way back. Mark kept the letter in his wallet. He read it sometimes on the harder days. And every time he passed that bench, he reminded himself, the smallest acts, showing up, offering kindness, seeing someone, can be the biggest turning points in another person's life. Because sometimes, the greatest twist in life isn't what happens to you, it's discovering that you mattered to someone else when you thought no one was watching. Mark's story started with a simple act, sharing his lunch. But behind that moment was a storm of grief, silent struggle, and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, something could change. One decision. One stranger. One contract. And everything began to shift. This wasn't a fairy tale. It didn't end with perfection. It ended with possibility. A man who once felt invisible now shows others they're seen. A father reclaimed by his daughter. A cycle of kindness that keeps spinning. We all walk past people every day who are carrying more than they show. Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is sit beside them, without judgment, and say, "You're not alone." If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? What would you do if you were in Mark's shoes? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us reach more hearts, one story at a time. Remember, you never know when a sandwich, a bench, or a quiet conversation might change a life. Maybe even yours.